My name is Kemily Carter. I'm 42 years old, and I work as a structural engineer. The day my brother stood in our father's office and bragged that everything now belonged to him, I realized my entire life had been built on a foundation of lies, and that foundation cracked the second the accountant cleared his throat. Within an hour, I lost what I thought was my place in the family, the illusion of being loved equally, and whatever fragile connection I still had with my brother. And maybe you'll think I'm exaggerating, but when something you've spent decades building suddenly collapses, it doesn't feel like a moment, it feels like an entire building coming down on top of you. If you've ever watched something fail structurally, you'll understand. It doesn't start with the collapse, it starts with small stress fractures nobody takes seriously. I think I was always one of those fractures. Growing up, I was the quiet one, not shy, just careful. My father, Robert Carter, ran a mid-sized construction company in Ohio, Carter Infrastructure Solutions. It wasn't glamorous, but it was stable. Bridges, municipal buildings, long-term contracts. The kind of work that required patience, precision, and a tolerance for slow progress. That was me too. My younger brother, Daniel, was the opposite. Loud, charming, impulsive. If I was the blueprint, he was the flashy render clients got excited about. People noticed him. People liked him. My father loved him in a way that always felt easier, more natural. I don't think Dad ever meant to make me feel like I didn't belong. But there's a difference between intention and impact, and as an engineer, I learned early that the smallest miscalculation can bring down an entire structure. I remember one night when I was 14. It was raining hard, one of those Midwest storms where the gutters overflow and the street turns into a shallow river. I had just gotten my first A in advanced math, and I ran downstairs holding the paper like it was proof of something important. Dad was in the living room with Daniel, watching a game. "Dad," I said, probably too eager, "I got a 98 on my test." He glanced over, smiled briefly. "That's good, Em." Then Daniel stood up, tossing a football in the air. "Hey Dad, Coach says I might start next season." And just like that, the conversation shifted. Dad leaned forward, fully engaged now. "That's my boy, that's what I like to hear." I stood there for a second longer than I should have, still holding the paper. I remember the feeling, not anger, not even sadness, just displacement, like I had stepped into a space that wasn't designed to hold me. That feeling never really left. By the time I was 18, I had already decided I would earn my place the only way I knew how, by making myself useful. Engineering made sense to me. Structures don't lie. Load-bearing walls either hold or they fail. There's no favoritism in physics, no emotional bias in calculations. I graduated top of my class, got into Purdue and specialized in structural systems. While Daniel bounced between majors, business, communications, marketing, I was pulling all-nighters calculating stress tolerances and learning how to design things that could survive pressure. I thought Dad would be proud. And he was in his own quiet way. He helped pay for my tuition. He'd occasionally ask about my projects, but when he talked about the future of the company, it was always Daniel. "Your brother's got the personality for it," he'd say. "Clients like him." What he didn't say, but what I understood, was that I didn't. There's a moment I keep coming back to. I was 27, fresh out of grad school, working my first real job at a firm in Chicago. Dad came to visit, and we went to see a pedestrian bridge my team had helped design. I walked him through everything, the load distribution, the materials, the way we accounted for wind stress. I was proud of it. It was my first real project. He listened, nodding. Then he said, "You know, you'd be good at helping Daniel run things back home. He could use someone like you behind the scenes." Behind the scenes. That phrase stuck with me. Not leading, not building something of my own, just supporting. I smiled and said, "Maybe someday." But inside, something shifted. Because here's the thing about structures. If you're always designing support beams for someone else's building, you never get to build your own. Still, I kept trying. When Mom died in 2018, everything changed, or at least I thought it would. Grief has a way of rearranging priorities, like an earthquake forcing you to reevaluate what's stable. Dad softened after that. He called me more often, asked me to come home more frequently. For the first time in years, I felt like maybe there was space for me again. One night, about 6 months after the funeral, We were sitting in his office, the same office where everything would eventually fall apart. He poured 2 glasses of whiskey, something he rarely did with me, and handed me one. "You always were the steady one," he said. I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded. "I don't say this enough," he continued, staring at the glass in his hand, "but I'm proud of you, Em, really proud." That moment, it meant more to me than I can explain. It felt like finally being recognized as part of the structure, not just an external support. I carried that moment with me for years. Maybe that's why what happened later hurt so much. Because I believed him. Fast forward to March 2023. Dad had been sick for a while, heart issues, complications that came and went. Nothing that seemed immediately fatal, but enough to keep us all on edge. Daniel moved back home to help, though from what I could tell, that mostly meant sitting in on meetings and making himself visible to clients. I visited when I could, but my job kept me in Chicago. I was leading a major project, a municipal building retrofit, and stepping away wasn't simple. Still, I called Dad every week, sometimes twice. Our last real conversation was on a Tuesday night. "Take care of yourself," he said, his voice thinner than usual. "You too," I replied. "I'll come down this weekend." He hesitated. "No rush, just we'll talk soon." We didn't. He passed away early Thursday morning. I got the call at 5:12 a.m. There's something surreal about losing a parent. It's like the central pillar of your life suddenly disappears, and everything else has to redistribute the load. The funeral was a blur. Black clothes, quiet voices, the smell of flowers that felt too sweet for the occasion. Daniel cried loudly, dramatically. People hugged him, told him how strong he was. I stood a few feet away, accepting condolences like they were transactions. "I'm sorry for your loss." "Thank you." Over and over again. After the service, we gathered at the house, Dad's house, the house we grew up in. That's when Daniel made his announcement. We were in Dad's office, me, Daniel, a couple of extended relatives, and Mr. Harris, the company's accountant who had worked with Dad for over 25 years. Daniel leaned back in Dad's chair, feet almost on the desk like he had already claimed it. "Well," he said, clapping his hands once, "I guess it's official. I'll be taking over the business." There it was. No discussion, no acknowledgement, just a declaration. Someone asked, "Did your dad leave instructions?" Daniel smirked. "Come on, everyone knows I was the one being groomed for this." He looked at me then, almost as an afterthought. "No offense, Em, you've got your own thing going." "No offense." It was such a casual dismissal, like I was a distant relative instead of his sister. I felt that old, familiar sensation, like I had stepped into a space not designed for me. I was about to say something, I don't even know what, when Mr. Harris cleared his throat. "Actually," he said quietly, "there are some details we should go over before making any assumptions." Daniel frowned. "What do you mean?" Mr. Harris adjusted his glasses, looking uncomfortable. "Your father made some changes in the past year," he continued, "significant ones." Something in his tone made the room shift. You could feel it like a structure under stress. Daniel sat up straighter. "What kind of changes?" Mr. Harris hesitated, then looked directly at me. "Changes that involve Emily." And just like that, the first crack appeared. I didn't know it yet, but everything I thought I understood about my father, my brother, and my place in that family was about to be completely rebuilt from the ground up. Mr. Harris had always been the kind of man who chose his words carefully, like he was balancing numbers in his head, even when he was just speaking. That day, though, he looked like someone about to drop something heavy and irreversible. The room went quiet in a way that didn't feel natural. Not the respectful silence of grief, we'd already had that at the funeral, but a tense, waiting kind of silence, like everyone sensed something was off but didn't yet understand how far off it really was. Daniel let out a short laugh, shaking his head. "What does Emily have to do with any of this?" He said my name like it was an afterthought again, like I was a footnote in a story he'd already decided the ending to. Mr. Harris didn't respond immediately. Instead, he reached into his worn leather briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. I noticed his hands, slightly unsteady. I had never seen him nervous before. "I think," he said slowly, "we should sit down for this." Daniel didn't sit. He stayed standing behind Dad's desk, his hand resting on the back of the chair like he didn't want to give up the position even for a second. "I'm fine right here," he said. "Just say it." Mr. Harris gave a small nod like he expected that reaction. Then he opened the folder. "Your father revised his estate plan 8 months ago," he began, "along with restructuring the ownership of Carter Infrastructure Solutions." I felt something tighten in my chest. 8 months ago, that would have been around the time Dad started calling me more often, around the time he told me he was proud of me. Daniel waved a hand impatiently. "Yeah, okay, and I'm the successor, we all know that." Mr. Harris finally looked up at him directly. "No, Daniel, that's not accurate." The words landed harder than anything else that had been said so far. Daniel blinked like he didn't quite process it at first. "What do you mean, not accurate?" Mr. Harris turned a page in the folder, then spoke clearly. "Your father transferred 100% ownership of the company into a trust. The sole beneficiary and controlling party of that trust is Emily." For a second, I genuinely thought I misheard him. It didn't make sense. Not structurally, not emotionally, not historically. It was like someone telling you a building you'd lived in your whole life had secretly been built on a completely different foundation. Daniel stared at him. "That's not funny." "I'm not joking." "No," Daniel snapped louder now. "That's not possible, Dad wouldn't do that." I still hadn't spoken. I couldn't. My brain was trying to catch up, running calculations that didn't balance. "Emily doesn't even work here," Daniel continued, his voice rising. "She's been gone for years. I'm the one who's been here. I'm the one who stepped up." His words hit something raw, but I stayed still. Mr. Harris didn't argue. He just slid a document across the desk. "This is the trust agreement," he said. "Signed, notarized and filed. Your father was very clear." Daniel didn't pick it up. He just stared at it like it might disappear if he ignored it long enough. Then finally he looked at me. And I'll never forget that look. It wasn't confusion anymore. It wasn't even anger, not yet. It was something colder. "You knew about this?" he asked. The question felt like an accusation, sharp and immediate. I shook my head. "No, I didn't." "Bullshit." "I didn't, Daniel." He laughed again, but this time it sounded wrong. Forced. "So you're telling me Dad just, what, secretly gave you everything and you had no idea?" "Yes." "Why would he do that?" he demanded. That was the question, wasn't it? Why? Because it didn't fit the narrative we'd all been living in for decades. Daniel was the one being groomed. Daniel was the future of the company. I was the one who left, the one who built something elsewhere. Mr. Harris cleared his throat again. "There's more." Daniel threw his hands up. "Of course there is." "Your father left a letter," he said, "specifically for this situation. He instructed that it be read in the presence of both of you." Everything slowed down after that. If the trust was the structural shift, the letter felt like the blueprint, the explanation for why everything had been built this way. Mr. Harris reached into the folder again and pulled out a sealed envelope. My name was written on it in Dad's handwriting. "Emily." Seeing it hit me harder than anything else so far, because suddenly this wasn't about legal documents or business structures. This was about him, about what he chose to say when he knew he wouldn't be here to explain himself. Daniel noticed it too. "Unbelievable," he muttered. "He writes her a letter." "It's addressed to both of you," Mr. Harris corrected gently. Daniel scoffed. "Yeah, I'm sure it is." Mr. Harris handed me the envelope. "Would you like to read it?" he asked. My hands felt heavier than they should have as I took it. For a second I just held it there, staring at the familiar slant of Dad's handwriting. I wasn't ready. But there's never really a right time to uncover the truth. Just like there's never a perfect moment for a structure to fail, it just does whether you're prepared or not. "Go on," Daniel said, his voice tight. "Let's hear it." I opened the envelope. The paper inside was thick, the kind Dad always used for important things. I unfolded it slowly, aware that every eye in the room was on me. Then I started reading. "Emily Daniels." If you're hearing this, it means I didn't get the chance to explain things myself, and I know this is going to cause confusion, maybe anger, but I need you to understand why I made the decisions I did. I had to pause there just for a second. My throat tightened unexpectedly. Daniel shifted impatiently. Keep going. I swallowed and continued. For years I told myself I was building something for both of you, a legacy, a business that would outlast me. But the truth is I made assumptions about who each of you were, and I let those assumptions guide my decisions. I could feel Daniel's eyes on me, but I didn't look up. I assumed Daniel would lead because he was outgoing, confident, good with people, and I assumed Emily didn't want this life because she chose a different path. That part hurt in a quiet, familiar way, because it was true. That's exactly how it had always been framed. But assumptions, the letter continued, are dangerous things. They're like building on soil you haven't tested. Everything might look stable on the surface, but underneath it's already shifting. That line hit me differently, because it sounded like something I would say, something I had said in different contexts throughout my career. I kept reading. Over the past few years, I started to see things more clearly. Daniel, you have strengths. You connect with people in a way I never could. But you also take risks you don't always understand. You make decisions quickly, sometimes without considering the long-term consequences. Daniel let out a sharp breath. Oh, here we go. I didn't stop. Emily, you've always been the one who understands how things hold together. You see the stress points. You plan for failure before it happens. I used to think that meant you didn't belong in this business. Now I realize it's exactly why you do. My vision blurred for a second. I blinked, forcing myself to keep going. In the last year, I reviewed the company's finances, contracts, and internal operations more closely than I had in a long time. What I found worried me. The room felt smaller. Decisions were being made that put the company at risk, not intentionally but recklessly. Short-term gains over long-term stability, contracts taken without proper evaluation, expenses that didn't align with our capacity. I heard Daniel shift again, more aggressively this time. That's not. Let her finish, Mr. Harris said quietly. Daniel went silent, but the tension in the room spiked. I realized that if I left things as they were, I read, my voice steadier now despite everything, the business wouldn't survive, not in the way I built it, not in a way that would protect the people who depend on it. My heart was pounding. So I made a decision, a difficult one. I didn't need to read the next line to know what it would say, but I did anyway. I put the company in Emily's hands. Silence. Not the kind from before, this one was heavier, final. I lowered the paper slightly, but my hands were still shaking. Daniel laughed again, but there was no humor in it now. So that's it, he said. He just decides I'm not good enough and hands everything to her. There's more, I said quietly, surprising even myself. Because there was. And somehow, I knew the rest would be even harder to hear. Daniel's laugh didn't stop right away. It stretched out, sharp and hollow, bouncing off the walls of Dad's office like something breaking apart midair. Yeah, he said, running a hand through his hair, packing now. Of course there's more, there's always more with him. I could feel everyone watching me, waiting for the rest, but my eyes were still on the paper. My hands had steadied a little, but my chest hadn't. It felt tight. Like something was pressing inward from all sides. I kept reading. This isn't about choosing one of you over the other, the letter said. It's about recognizing what each of you is capable of, and what the company needs to survive. Bull, Daniel started but stopped himself, exhaling hard through his nose. I continued. Daniel, if you're angry right now, I understand. You have every right to feel that way, but I need you to hear this, even if you don't accept it today. I hesitated before reading the next line, but forced myself through it. You are not ready to carry this on your own. That did it. Daniel slammed his hand against the desk. The sound cracked through the room like a snapped beam. That's not his decision to make anymore, he snapped. He's gone. My whole body flinched, but I didn't stop reading. I've seen the numbers. I've seen the contracts you've signed, the risks you've taken, the money you've moved. Some of it I approved, some of it I shouldn't have, that's on me. Mr. Harris shifted slightly, like he already knew what was coming. But there are things you did that I didn't know about until recently, things that could have cost us everything. Daniel froze. It wasn't obvious at first, but I saw it, the microsecond pause, the stiffness in his shoulders, like a structure suddenly taking on more load than it was designed for. What is that supposed to mean? He said, quieter now but more dangerous. I kept going. I asked Mr. Harris to conduct a full review 6 months ago. What he found confirmed my concerns. Now all eyes shifted to Mr. Harris. Daniel looked at him like he'd just betrayed him personally. You went behind my back. Mr. Harris didn't flinch. Your father requested it. Daniel scoffed, but there was less confidence in it now. Yeah, and what exactly did you find? I looked back down at the letter. Unauthorized reallocations, I read. Funds moved between accounts without proper documentation. Bids submitted below cost just to secure contracts. Personal expenses categorized as business operations. The words felt heavy in my mouth, technical, precise, but devastating. Daniel shook his head immediately. That's not what that was, those were temporary adjustments. I didn't respond, I just kept reading. Individually, these decisions might not have destroyed the company, but together they created stress points, weaknesses in the structure. My throat tightened again. And if left unchecked, those weaknesses would have led to collapse. No one spoke. Even the air felt different now, sicker. I didn't come to this decision lightly, the letter continued. I know what it looks like, I know how it feels, but I'm not punishing you, Daniel. I'm trying to protect something bigger than both of us. Daniel let out a low, bitter laugh. Protect it from me. No one answered him. I swallowed and read the next line, softer now. Emily, I know this puts you in a difficult position. You didn't ask for this, but I also know you're the only one who can do it right. That line, it didn't feel like praise. It felt like weight, responsibility, like being handed a structure mid-collapse and being told to keep it standing. I've watched you build your career, the letter said. Not loudly, not for attention, but carefully, thoughtfully. You understand that real strength isn't about speed or confidence, it's about stability. My vision blurred again. You see the things others miss. You plan for failure before it happens, and most importantly, you don't cut corners. I could feel my heartbeat in my ears. That's what this company needs now. I paused just for a second, because the next part felt different even before I read it. Maury, personal. I owe you an apology, the letter said. I blinked, caught off guard. For years I treated you like you were on the outside of this family's future. I told myself it was because you chose a different path, but the truth is, I didn't make space for you in the one I was building. My grip tightened on the paper. That was my failure. The room disappeared for a moment. It was just me and those words. Because I had spent so many years wondering if I was the one who had walked away, if I was the one who didn't fit. And here it was. He had seen it. Too late maybe, but he had seen it. I should have told you sooner how much I respected the person you became, I read, my voice quieter now, not just as a professional but as my daughter. That almost broke me. Daniel made a sharp, impatient sound. Are you done yet? I ignored him. This isn't just about the company, the letter continued. It's about making things right as much as I still can. I took a breath and read the final part. I'm asking you, Emily, not just to take over, but to rebuild, fix what's been weakened, protect what matters, and if you can, find a way to bring your brother back into this in a way that doesn't put everything at risk. I stopped. The last line sat there, heavy and unresolved. I love you both, more than I ever said out loud. Dad. Silence. Real silence this time, not tense, not waiting, just empty. I lowered the letter slowly, my hands no longer shaking, but not because I was calm. It was something else, something steadier, like a structure finally settling after a shift. Daniel stared at me for a few seconds, then at Mr. Harris, then back at me. And then he said it. You're not real family. The words didn't come out loud at first, more like a low, controlled statement, but they hit harder than anything else he'd said. I felt it physically, like something sharp pressing into my chest. "What?" I said, even though I heard him clearly. He stepped forward now, eyes locked on mine. "You heard me," he said, louder this time. "You're not real family. You left. You built your own life somewhere else. You don't get to just walk back in and take everything." There it was. The breaking point. It didn't feel explosive. It felt quiet, internal, like a beam finally giving way after years of pressure. For a second I couldn't speak. My body reacted before my mind did. My fingers went numb, my throat tightened, my vision narrowed slightly. "You think a letter changes that," he continued, "that suddenly you're the one who deserves this?" "I never said I deserved anything," I replied, my voice steadier than I expected. "Then say it," he shot back. "Say you're not going to take it." I looked at him. Really looked at him. And for the first time I didn't see my little brother. I saw someone who had built his identity on something unstable and was now watching it crumble. "I didn't ask for this," I said, "but it's already done." "That's not an answer. It's the only one I have." He shook his head, packing again. "This is insane. This is completely insane." Then he turned to Mr. Harris. "You're just going to let this happen?" Mr. Harris's voice was calm. "It's not a matter of letting anything happen. Your father made a legal decision. My role is to ensure it's carried out." Daniel let out a harsh laugh. Of course it is." Then he looked back at me, and there was nothing left in his expression now but anger. "You really think you can run this company?" he said. "You don't know anything about it." "I know more than you think," I replied. "Yeah, when's the last time you even looked at our books?" I didn't answer that directly. Instead, I said, "When's the last time you balanced them properly?" That landed. His jaw tightened. "You don't know what you're talking about." "Then explain it," I said, holding his gaze. "Explain the reallocations, the contracts below cost, the expenses." He didn't. He just stared at me, breathing harder now. Because here's the thing, when a structure starts failing, denial is the first response. You don't want to believe the cracks are real. You convince yourself they're superficial. Until they're not. "This isn't over," he said finally. I didn't say it was. He grabbed his jacket off the chair, shoving his arms into it. "You want it," he said, his voice low and sharp. "Fine, take it, let's see how long you last." Then he walked out. The door slammed behind him, the sound echoing through the house. And just like that, everything changed. Not all at once, not dramatically, but fundamentally. Like the moment you realize the structure you've been standing in your whole life was never built the way you thought it was, and now, somehow, you're the one responsible for keeping it from collapsing. The door slammed so hard the glass in the cabinet rattled. For a few seconds after Daniel left, nobody moved. It felt like the aftermath of a structural failure, not the collapse itself, but that eerie stillness right after, when dust is still settling and everyone's trying to understand what's still standing. I was still holding the letter. Mr. Harris spoke first. "Emily, I know this is a lot to process." That was an understatement. I let out a slow breath and folded the paper carefully, almost automatically, like preserving it mattered. Maybe it did. "What happens now?" I asked. My voice sounded different to me, quieter but anchored, like something had shifted internally, not healed, just stabilized enough to function. Mr. Harris nodded, as if he'd been waiting for that question. "Now we start with the facts." That phrasing made sense to me. Facts, data, load analysis before reconstruction. He opened the folder again and turned it toward me. "Your father wasn't exaggerating. The company has issues." I stepped closer to the desk, Dad's desk, and looked down at the documents. Balance sheets, cash flow statements, contract summaries, numbers, columns, red flags that didn't need emotional interpretation. "Walk me through it," I said. For the next 40 minutes, Mr. Harris did exactly that. And the more he explained, the more the picture came into focus. Daniel hadn't just made a few bad decisions. He had created a pattern. Small risks at first, underbidding contracts to win them, assuming they'd make up the losses later, then shifting funds between accounts to cover shortfalls, delaying payments, reclassifying expenses. Individually, each one could be explained away. Together, they formed something dangerous. It's like a progressive load failure, I said quietly, almost to myself. Mr. Harris glanced at me. Exactly. I nodded slowly. Each decision adds stress to the system. It holds for a while until it doesn't. That's where we are now, he said. I traced one of the columns with my finger. How bad? He didn't sugarcoat it. If nothing changes, 6 to 9 months before serious liquidity issues, possibly sooner if any of these contracts go south. I absorbed that. 6 to 9 months. That wasn't a long timeline, not for something this complex, not for something already compromised. Okay, I said, straightening up, then we don't wait. Mr. Harris studied me for a second, like he was reassessing something. Are you sure you want to take this on? He asked. You could sell, liquidate, walk away with a significant amount and none of the risk. I thought about that. It would have been the easier option. Clean, controlled, no emotional entanglement. But structures, real ones, meaningful ones, aren't meant to be abandoned at the first sign of failure. They're meant to be reinforced, repaired, rebuilt if necessary. No, I said finally, we fix it. He gave a small nod. Then we start immediately. That was the moment, I think, not when I inherited the company, not when the letter was read. But when I chose to stay. The next few weeks were relentless. I took a leave of absence from my firm in Chicago, packed a suitcase, drove back to my hometown and moved into Dad's house, not because I wanted to live there, but because proximity mattered. I needed to be close to the problem to understand it fully. The first time I walked into the company office as the actual owner, it felt surreal. People looked at me differently. Some with curiosity, some with skepticism, a few with something that looked like relief. Word had spread quickly, it always does. I called a full staff meeting that first Monday morning. About 30 people gathered in the main conference room, project managers, administrative staff, site supervisors, people who had worked with my father for years, some longer than I'd been alive. I stood at the front, aware of every eye on me. My name is Emily Carter, I began. Most of you know me as Robert's daughter. A few nods. As of last week, I've taken over ownership of the company. Murmurs, not loud but noticeable. I know this is unexpected, I continued, and I'm not here to pretend otherwise, but I also know this company matters, to all of you, to the clients we serve, and to the community we've built around it. I paused, letting that settle. My job now is simple, I said. Stabilize what's unstable, fix what's broken, and make sure this company is still standing 5, 10, 20 years from now. One of the project managers, Tom, I think, raised a hand slightly. Does this mean things are bad? I didn't lie. It means there are issues, I said, but issues can be addressed. Ignoring them would be the real problem. That seemed to land better than vague reassurance. I'll be meeting with each department individually this week, I added. I want to understand how things actually work here, not just on paper. After the meeting, people approached me one by one, some cautiously supportive, some clearly unsure. One older supervisor, Mike, shook my hand and said, "Your dad trusted you, that's enough for me." That mattered more than he probably realized. Not everyone was on board, though. By Wednesday, I started hearing it, the quiet resistance. She's not even from here anymore. She's an engineer, not a business owner. Daniel knew how things worked. That last one came up a lot. Daniel. He hadn't come back to the office since the day he walked out. But his presence was still everywhere, in the systems, the decisions, the culture. Undoing that wasn't going to be quick. Or easy. By the end of the second week, I had a clearer picture. 3 major contracts were underperforming, 2 significantly underbid, one with escalating material costs that hadn't been accounted for. Cash flow was tighter than it should have been, and there were discrepancies in expense reports that couldn't be ignored. I sat in Dad's office, my office now, late one night staring at the numbers. It reminded me of a structural assessment I'd done years ago on an agging parking garage. On the surface, it looked fine. But once we started testing, we found corrosion in the support beams, cracks in critical joints, load stress beyond acceptable limits. The recommendation had been clear: immediate reinforcement, partial closure, and long-term rehabilitation. This wasn't that different. The next morning, I made the first major decision. We pulled out of one of the underbid contracts. It wasn't popular. It meant penalties. It meant admitting we couldn't deliver under the current terms. But continuing would have been worse. I explained it in a meeting with the senior staff. "We're not going to keep pretending something works when it doesn't," I said. "That's how you get catastrophic failure." Tom nodded slowly. "And the other 2 contracts?" "We renegotiate," I said, "or we restructure how we execute them." "And if the clients push back?" "They will," I said, "but we'll deal with that when it happens." This was the part people weren't used to. Not reactive decisions, not short-term fixes. Deliberate, sometimes uncomfortable corrections. By week 4, the changes were noticeable. Tighter expense controls, more transparent reporting, actual oversight on bidding processes. And slowly, very slowly, the resistance started to shift. Not disappear, but soften. People started coming to me with concerns instead of working around them. That was when I knew we were moving in the right direction. Then Daniel showed up. It was a Thursday afternoon. I remember because I had just finished a call with a client about renegotiating one of the contracts. The receptionist buzzed my office. "Emily, your brother, here." Of course he was. I took a breath. "Send him in." He walked in like he still owned the place. Same confidence, same presence. But something was different, subtle but there. Less certainty. He didn't sit. "Busy?" he asked, glancing around. "Always," I replied. He nodded once like he expected that. "I've been hearing things," he said. "I'm sure you have. You pulled out of the Westfield contract." "Yes. That was a good deal." "No," I said calmly. "It looked like a good deal, it wasn't sustainable." He smirked slightly. "You always did like playing it safe." I met his gaze. "And you always liked ignoring the risks." That landed. He crossed his arms. "So what, you're just going to come in here and undo everything I built?" "Built?" That word almost made me laugh, but I didn't. "I'm not undoing it," I said. "I'm fixing it." "According to who?" "According to the numbers," I replied. "According to reality." He stepped closer to the desk. "You think you're better than me?" "No," I said. "I think we're different." "That's a nice way of saying it." "It's an accurate way of saying it." For a second, neither of us spoke. Then he said, quieter now, "You really believe he was right, don't you?" I thought about that. About the letter, about the decisions, about everything that had led to this moment. "I think he saw something he hadn't seen before," I said. "And that something was you." "It was the situation," I corrected. He shook his head. "No, it was you." There was something in his voice now that hadn't been there before. Not anger, not exactly. Something closer to resentment mixed with something else. "I was here," he said. "I was the one doing the work." "I know." "Then how does that not matter?" "It does matter," I said, "but effort and outcome aren't the same thing." That hit harder than anything else I'd said. He looked away for a second, jaw tight. Then back at me. "So what now?" he asked. That was the question, wasn't it? The one Dad had left hanging in that letter. I leaned back slightly, considering him. "Now," I said, "we decide if you want to be part of this in a way that actually works." He frowned. "What does that mean?" "It means no more shortcuts, no more moving things around to make them look better than they are. It means accountability." "And if I don't agree to that?" "Then you walk away," I said simply. He let out a slow breath. For the first time, he didn't have an immediate response. Because this wasn't about winning anymore. It was about whether he could operate within a structure that wouldn't bend to him. And that's a very different kind of challenge. Daniel didn't answer me right away. He just stood there, looking at the desk, then at the walls, like he was seeing the place differently for the first time. I recognized that look. I'd seen it in site inspections, when someone realizes the structure they trusted isn't as stable as they thought. "I need time," he said finally. It wasn't what I expected. Not anger, not a fight, just that. I nodded. "Take it." He left without slamming the door this time. And that, more than anything, told me something had shifted. Not fixed, not resolved, but shifted. The next few months were the hardest work I've ever done. And I don't mean emotionally, I mean structurally. Every day felt like reinforcing a building while people were still inside it. You can't shut everything down, but you can't ignore the damage either. So you work in sections, stabilize one part while monitoring the rest, prioritize the load-bearing elements. That's what I did. We renegotiated 2 of the failing contracts. It wasn't easy. There were long calls, uncomfortable admissions, and a lot of "this is where we are" conversations. One client walked away. That hurt, but not as much as continuing would have. We cut unnecessary expenses, tightened internal approvals, rebuilt reporting systems from the ground up. I brought in an external auditor, not because I didn't trust Mr. Harris, but because I needed transparency that no one could question. That decision earned me both respect and resentment. "You don't trust us," someone asked in a meeting. "I trust systems more than individuals," I replied, "because systems don't get tired, defensive, or careless." That's the engineer in me, always will be. There were nights I stayed in the office past midnight, going through spreadsheets line by line. The hum of the fluorescent lights, the faint smell of paper and old coffee, it became routine. Sometimes I'd sit in Dad's chair and think about that letter. About what he saw. About how long he'd been carrying that realization before acting on it. And about how close everything had come to failing. By month 4, things started to stabilize. Not perfectly, not completely, but measurably. Cash flow improved, projects were back within realistic margins, the constant sense of impending collapse eased. That's when people started to believe. Not in me exactly, but in the structure holding. And that's always the first step. Daniel came back on a Monday morning in early fall. No announcement, no drama. He just walked in. I was in a meeting when he arrived. When I stepped out, he was sitting in the waiting area, scrolling through his phone like he'd been there 100 times before. I stopped a few feet away. "You decided," I said. He looked up. "Yeah," he replied. I waited. "I don't agree with everything you're doing," he said. "Probably never will." "That's fine." But he hesitated like the word itself took effort. "I get it now, some of it." That was more than I expected. "I can't run things the way I was," he admitted. "I see that." I nodded slowly. "And," I asked. "And I don't want to walk away," he said. "Not completely." There it was. The moment Dad had hoped for, I think. Not reconciliation, not a perfect understanding. Just willingness. "If you come back," I said, "it's under structure, clear roles, oversight, no exceptions." He smirked slightly. "You really don't bend, do you?" "Not where it matters." He considered that. Then nodded once. "Okays." And just like that we started something new. Not as equals in the way we once pretended to be, but as parts of the same system, with defined functions, limits, and responsibilities. Daniel handled client relationships, he was good at that, always had been. But decisions, financials, final approvals, those ran through me. At first there was friction. Old habits don't disappear overnight. There were moments he pushed boundaries, moments I had to reinforce them. "Not this way," I'd say. Or "show me the numbers." Or sometimes just "no." And every time it mattered. Because consistency is what makes a structure reliable. Over time, something unexpected happened. He adjusted. Not completely, not perfectly, but enough. And I started to see him differently too. Not just as the brother who dismissed me, but as someone who had been given a role he wasn't fully equipped for and tried to fill it the only way he knew how. That doesn't excuse everything, but it explains more than I used to allow. By the end of the first year, the company wasn't just stable. It was healthy. Not booming, not dramatically transformed, but solid, reliable, sustainable. And for the first time, I felt like I wasn't standing outside the structure anymore. I was part of it. Not because someone made space for me, but because I claimed it. There was a moment, small, almost insignificant, that stays with me. It was a Tuesday evening, nothing special. I was finishing up some reports, getting ready to leave. Daniel walked past my office, paused, then leaned against the doorframe. "Hey," he said. "Hey." He nodded toward the files on my desk. "You still double-check everything?" "Always." He smirked. "Figures." He started to walk away, then stopped. "You know," he said, not looking at me now, "he would have liked how things turned out." I didn't answer right away, because I didn't know if that was true. Or maybe I didn't need it to be. "Maybe," I said. He nodded once, then left. That was it. No big apology, no dramatic reconciliation. Just acknowledgement. And sometimes that's enough. As for what I gained, yeah, there was money, ownership, security. The company is mine, legally and practically. But that's not the part that matters. What I gained was clarity. About who I am. About what I bring to the table. About the difference between being included and actually belonging. Revenge, if you want to call it that, was never really the point. There were moments early on where I wanted Daniel to feel what I felt growing up, overlooked, dismissed, secondary. But that doesn't build anything. It just shifts the damage. And I've seen enough structural failures to know, repeating the same mistakes in a different form still leads to collapse. What actually healed things wasn't taking something from him. It was building something that didn't depend on his approval in the first place. So if you're reading this and you've spent years trying to prove your place in someone else's system, stop. Not in a dramatic, walk away from everything way, but in a quiet, deliberate one. Look at the structure you're standing in. Ask yourself if it was ever designed to hold you. And if it was, you have two choices. Reinforce it, or build something else. Both are hard, but only one of them will actually hold. These days my life is quieter. I split my time between the office and a small apartment I finally bought back in Chicago. I still visit the old house sometimes, though I don't live there anymore. The last time I was there, I stood in Dad's office alone. The desk was the same, the chair, the shelves. But it felt different. Not heavy. Not loaded with expectation. Just a room. I ran my hand across the surface of the desk, then turned off the light and left. No big moment. No dramatic closure. Just a quiet understanding. Some things don't need to be fixed. They just need to be understood. And sometimes that's what finally lets you move forward.